Hello and welcome back to another episode of our draft series. Today I'm going to be talking about Cole Payton. This is the first episode now that I'm recording after a player has been drafted to his team. I just wasn't able to get to as many quarterbacks as I was hoping to before the draft. So now these episodes going forward will have the context of team fit and where those players have ended up in the draft. Now, I will say my goal here is still to evaluate these guys as how I see them and try not to let the results of where they were picked influence my evaluation of the player. And so with Payton, that's what I intend to do. Payton's a guy who was at North Dakota State for 5 seasons and only started in his last year, which is already a little bit of a red flag as a prospect. Like, there's some questions about, okay, you were at a lower level of competition, albeit at a dominant school, at a lower level of competition, and for 4 years you sat and had to wait your turn. But Payton had a really good year for North Dakota State this year, and one of the biggest positives that causes you to maybe have some hope in him is that this guy does have really promising physical tools. And so even though he's an older guy, even though he's a guy that's been around in college for a long time, there is some benefit to Payton as a prospect in that he is really physically talented, and so you see some potential in him more so than you typically would a low-level D2 type guy that had success in one final year as a starter. So Payton's 6'3", he's 230 pounds, he has huge hands, over 10-inch hands. So all of the prototypical markers that you're looking for from a size perspective are there. You can see it pretty quickly, like he's very well built, and that's reflected in his play style. Payton uses his size pretty well, I would say, especially the place you see it the most is he's able to shake off defenders in the pocket and avoid pressure because of his strength. He's not going to easily get pulled down or arm tackled, and there's times where, especially in the level of competition he's playing, where he's more athletic than almost everybody he's playing against, when he's able to break those tackles and get out of the pocket, it allows him to create big plays for the offense. In the NFL, I'm not sure that he'll have that same ability to generate explosives as he did in college, but I think the escapability and his ability to shake off defenders, especially smaller defenders, is something that will persist in the NFL. Payton, in terms of his movement, his athleticism, is a really good athlete. He's able to get to a pretty high speed. He moves pretty well in general for a guy that's 230 pounds, so like agility is not a huge strength for him, but it's good relative to his size. You also see it the most when he's able to escape up out of the pocket. He doesn't work as well side to side, but when he sees a gap, he's able to shoot it pretty quickly and get up to a high speed where it's tough for smaller defenders to tackle him one-on-one because of the strength and the athleticism. I think he accelerates pretty well for a guy his size, which is a really good sign for a guy you're hoping can generate some of that explosive athleticism towards the NFL. So overall, I would say he's a really good athlete, and that part of his game is very impressive. On the other side of the athleticism, he also has really strong arm talent, and he has multiple facets of his game where that demonstrates itself. So you see him able to drive the ball down the field. It's pretty obvious when you watch his tape that throws deep down the field are not a challenge for him. He's able to do that even if he doesn't have his feet perfectly set or if pressure's coming down. He can still get throws off and generate enough power to get the ball down the field. He also is able to throw off his back foot. He also has the arm talent to layer throws, which some guys really struggle with that. I think that is something you see on his tape, and he certainly has the arm talent to do so. All of this allows him to throw into tight windows pretty confidently, sometimes more so than he should, but he's able to deliver balls in tight windows without having to worry as much about the ball floating in the air, resulting in a deflection or an interception. It's more so the decision-making for him that will lead to that, and I'll get to that a little bit later. Payton is a guy that overall has impressive downfield throwing and vision. I would say this is a guy that I do think sometimes doesn't process as well as you would hope, but I think his vision down the field is pretty good, meaning that he sees and understands windows and understands where he needs to get the ball to, especially against zone, in order for it to be an accurate ball for his receiver. Now, sometimes he just misses those throws, right? Sometimes he sprays he's a guy that doesn't have much experience. He's pretty raw and undefined. So there are times where he might understand where the ball needs to be placed and it doesn't get there. But I do think overall he has good vision, and I like his creativity as a thrower. So let's get into some of the struggles with Payton. Following that, we'll get into some comps for him, and then I'll finish with a grade. I don't have any clips to show for him today. So some of the basic things that are a little scary about Payton are just some of the parts that are more natural to his game. So I haven't mentioned it yet. He's a lefty, which some teams don't really care about at all. I think that does maybe scare off some other teams, but it's probably something that, if you have a backup that's a lefty, do you have to change some of the plays that you're running? Do you have to flip stuff in camp to make it to where a boot would be to his opposite side? Like there are some things like that. I don't really care about that personally, but it's something to consider, and I'm probably biased because I'm left-handed, but that is something to note with him. He also, just in the way he throws, he takes a very wide stance. Like his feet are very spread apart when he throws. A lot of times it's not a huge deal for him because he's 6'3", so like even though his feet are spread out, right, he's a little lower to the ground. It's not the end of the world for him, but there are times where pressure is coming, and if the pocket is starting to condense or collapse, his feet being spread out just makes it more likely that he will get disrupted as he's trying to get a throw off. And you see it happen on tape. The mechanics in general scare me. Not only the spread out feet, but he also throws with a very low arm slot. And so for a guy that is, he's 6'3", but he's not 6'6", right? Like that additional space of being able to get that ball out in a crowded pocket, I have concerns about that with him. Both the spread out feet, the sidearm delivery. There's a lot of things that concern me about his ability to get throws off. It also just takes him longer to wind up. He's got a longer throwing motion, so you're going to have some concerns about that as well. In general, the biggest concern I have with Payton is the pocket movement. I talked earlier about how he's pretty explosive when he runs straight ahead if a gap opens up for him, and he does have some ability to pause for just an additional second and read out a play if he's a little bit worried about pressure, but he thinks he can get a throw off. He does a pretty good job of, pausing on his back foot one more step, and then because he has the arm talent, he can afford to kind of hitch a little bit and then make a throw. And I think he does that pretty well. Outside of that, I think his pocket movement is very poor. There are times where he tries to escape out the back of the pocket when it's just clearly not the right place for him to go, and it results in a longer sack. There's other times where he may not even move poorly, but his head drops when pressure comes, and it results in him getting off of an easy, quick throw that would have been positive yardage for the offense. And instead, you're either resulting in an incompletion or taking a negative if it ends up in a sack. So overall, his reaction to pressure, if it's an easy answer for him, he can get there. But when it's more complex or when it requires a little bit higher level processing, he really struggles to get there. On top of that, I do think there's times where he will just leave clean pockets. It's not as often as maybe some other guys that you'll see like Klubnik, but it is something you see with him. Overall, Payton, I think, is a player with really interesting tools. There are clear deficiencies in his game, right? This isn't a perfect prospect by any means, but you are talking about a guy that has enough tools where I completely understand why, spoiler alert, the Eagles bet on him in the 5th round. This is a guy that if you can, allow to be a backup for a couple years, you hope that some of those tools become more refined and he can clean up some of the issues, especially with the pocket movement and some of the late down decision making that cause him to struggle a little bit more and be less ready for the NFL. So as far as comps, my best case for Cole Payton is Sam Darnold. Darnold was obviously a much higher level prospect coming out of college. And I think this is a high level best case. I don't foresee him being anything close to Sam Darnold in the realistic range of outcomes. So this is very, very much a high end. Like if everything works out, what would it look like? But I do think Darnold had some similar concerns, and even early in his career demonstrated some similar concerns about taking a bunch of negative plays, whether that's sacks or turnovers. He's a very physically gifted player, and that was demonstrated in college as well as now in the NFL. He also has a really long throwing motion, and that is something that when he was coming out of school was known. But also I think with Payton is something that you clearly see on tape, and you wonder if some of the mechanics there will have to get cleaned up. both guys are also just really impressive athletes. Like Darnold, we don't think of him as that like Mahomes, Josh Allen, Lamar level athlete, but coming out of college, that was a big plus for him. He had the size and the athleticism and the arm strength that got people really excited about him as a prospect. Maybe not on that top tier level, but one below that. I think Payton is similar in terms of his tools, but just much less refined compared to what the expectations were for Darnold coming out of USC. So I think that's like, if he were to reach his ceiling, he's probably more of a guy that's still an average NFL quarterback, is probably more so his ceiling. But I do think it's a guy that is more so on that Darnold camp than the Kirk Cousins camp, meaning that his highs are going to be really high, his lows are going to be really low. And there's going to be games where it looks rough, he turns the ball over multiple times, he makes poor decisions, but other times he's going to generate a lot of explosives for your offense. So again, that's best case. Worst case for me is a pretty low-end outcome, because if he doesn't refine the accuracy to a higher degree, and also the pocket movement especially, then I could see him, again, just not really being an NFL player and never getting the chance to start. So my worst case for him is a guy, Brennan Armstrong, who did not have the same physical traits as Payton, but was another kind of gunslinger lefty that had a really talented arm, but was not necessarily refined enough in other aspects of his game. Plus, definitely was not as good of an athlete as Payton was in order to succeed at the next level. So had to throw a lefty comp in there for a guy that just wasn't really an NFL player. And I think that's a potential outcome for Payton if he doesn't continue to clean up some of the more difficult aspects of his game. So overall, for Payton, I've got a 5th round grade on him, which is exactly where the Eagles took him. I think this pick made a lot of sense for Philly. They have a quarterback situation right now that I think they still probably feel relatively confident in, but we know the Eagles are a team that if things go south for a couple years, they're not hesitant whatsoever to move off of quarterbacks. And I don't think that's completely impossible with Hurts, given the struggles that they've seen recently with him. And obviously, he's a Super Bowl winning quarterback, but we've seen them run guys out that have had just as much success as Hurts before. So I think Payton makes a lot of sense for them. They obviously, Wentz was a guy they took also from North Dakota State, so they've had some history of success drafting guys from that program. And I think Philly loves to continue to stockpile these late round guys and have that sort of quarterback factory mindset. I think Payton's a great guy to throw in there, especially if they do end up keeping Tanner McKee. Like, this guy is a 3rd quarterback, is more than qualified to do that and learn behind a couple guys that are more solid NFL pros. So yeah, overall, Payton's a fun watch. I completely understand why a team like the Eagles bet on him in the mid-rounds with a guy that has potential starting upside, but needs some work to get there, especially coming from a lower level of competition where the step up in athleticism for him is going to be very significant compared to some other guys that played at higher levels. So that'll do it for this episode. Again, Cole Payton's a pretty fun watch. Hopefully he'll have a chance to play at some point in his NFL career, whether that's with the Eagles or with another team. So that'll do it for today's episode. Hope to have some more of these coming out on guys that were drafted, and as well as some UDFA guys that I was already planning on watching. So stay tuned for those, and we'll catch y'all soon.